But the biggest suit, the most critical suit, is Robert Kennedy's suit against Facebook for the Ninth Circuit. Unless he wins, Berenson's got zero chance of winning. Zero. I'm sure he'll go and fundraise off the suit again, just like he did last time. But so the problem is right now, in order to prove state actor, you have to prove the state literally. The courts are requiring you prove the state literally directed it. And things, and so. Emails they're saying are not enough. Specific targeting they're saying is not enough. Collusion is not enough. Coordination is not enough. Incentivizing it is not enough. Saying that they'll revoke funding is not enough. Saying that you'll be subject to antitrust investigation is not enough. It's got to be the federal government writes and says you shall do this, this, and this by this date,
and then pass a resolution in Congress to make it.
Exactly. And then the president sign off. I mean, they're making a joke out of it. I mean, they're ignoring it because the federal judges are very protective of big tech. They have been ever since Section 230 was passed. They misinterpreted it to mean something it didn't mean, and ever since then, they've found every excuse possible to not allow you to sue big tech. And they've been, and so. Even as their political protection has been eroded. And I'm sure why Zuckerberg did what he did was to defend himself. Hey, we're just doing what the FBI told us to do. And remember, this was Trump's FBI. And again, this is partially on Trump. He didn't purge it, so his own FBI was sabotaging him. His own Defense Department was sabotaging him. His own CIA was sabotaging him. His own NSA was sabotaging him because he wasn't exercising his constitutional authority over those agencies. And now they believe that they are really governed. I mean, that's what the whole Trump raid is all about. It's about their assertion that no, the bureaucracy gets to determine what's classified, not the elected president. The bureaucracy gets to determine what's a presidential record, not the actual president. The bureaucracy gets to determine what happens and doesn't happen in civil and criminal cases, not the elected president. The bureaucracy doesn't exist constitutionally without the president. Its only authority is derivative of the president. And so it shows how dangerously absurd it is what they're doing. But it's part of a pattern of behavior.
Okay. That was not on the menu, but Robert.
Oh, now we got...
someone is smashing something. Can you stop doing that? Sorry. The wall is going to come down.
Speaking of, can you stop doing that? We brought our claim, the Children's Health Defense against the Food and Drug Administration filed our opposition. They're seeking to dismiss the case on grounds of standing and sovereign immunity and that nobody can sue them. This is about the Food and Drug FDA authorizing the COVID-19 vaccine and saying it was safe, effective, and was a vaccine for children under the age of 11 all the way up down to 6 months old. And that means, as the District of Columbia was trying to do until they had a setback this week, institute mandates as to any school child having to get the vaccine. Also, people, the way Texas law works, a random adult can actually authorize somebody getting a vaccine in certain circumstances. And foster children are depending on the FDA's own information because they are making their own determination as to whether to get the shot. And so, they're being told by Big Bird and Elmo to get the shot. So we have brought suit saying that all of this was illegal. The emergency use authorization wasn't within the emergency use powers because there is no emergency facing young children from COVID-19 in America today. Secondly, and they didn't meet other preconditions of the emergency use authorization power in the first place. The FDA is claiming as long as we call it an emergency power, you can't sue us. That's their theory. Our argument is no, whether you were right about whether it was an emergency power is always subject to judicial review, whether it's called ultra-virus action and as well as APA, Administrative Procedures Act review. Then the other claim is that they are labeling and marketing this drug. That's what the FDA really is. It's a labeling and marketing agency. People think of it as this super scientific agency. It's not actually. Its scientists are there just to make sure the label is right. And they've been usurping their powers ever since. They were put in place because people used to send in across state lines the beginning of the 1900s. They'd send a can in across interstate commerce to sell in a grocery store to some sucker or sap in another state that said, hey, here's some nice corn. And you open it up and it's like onions, right? I mean, it's something that isn't at all what the label says. So the FDA came and said, we'll make sure those labels are honest. And if they say corn, it's corn. Magically, that became the power to regulate all medicine in America, which was never supposed to be the case. In fact, Congress specifically says it's not supposed to be the case. Constitutionally, it's not a power they have. That's reserved to the states, the police power over medicine. But so our contesting is they're labeling this drug as safe. They're labeling this drug as effective. They're labeling this drug as a vaccine. All violated federal law, including their redefinition of the word vaccine itself, violated federal law, that none of these things are emergency powers exempt. Go ahead.
What do they mean by effective? Like, not trying to be tongue-in-cheek facetious.
Well, at the time, they said effective meant it would prevent infection and prevent transmission. Over time, they've moderated their position to say it means it will prevent or protect against hospitalization or severe illness or death. But they've said different things at different times. And what most people have heard, especially when they hear this drug called a vaccine, based on the FDA unilaterally, without going through the notice and comment process, without going through the citizen and petition comment process, the FDA unilaterally redefined the word vaccine in a way it's never meant in the history of man. And our argument in this case is that that very definition is a lie, because it misleads people, particularly say you're an 8-year-old kid deciding whether or not you're supposed to get this shot, and you rely upon the government's agency. The government agency saying, don't worry, it's safe. The government agency using Big Bird and Elmo. The government agency saying, don't worry, it's effective. And then you see it's a vaccine. You're like, oh, I know what vaccines are. Vaccines prevent me from getting a disease. Vaccines prevent me from transmitting a disease. That's what the word vaccine meant. They had to secretly redefine it so they could effectively lie to the public, because the public doesn't have that definition of the word. The public's definition of the word is this prevents transmission and infection. So this is the FDA lying to the world, lying to Americans, trying to put kids as young as 6 months old in imminent risk of severe harm, which is being detailed and documented on a regular basis based on, doctor data and falsified tests, as we'll get into in the Pfizer whistleblower case. And so consequently, they should not be allowed to continue to issue these approvals and authorizations saying it's safe, saying it's effective, saying it's a vaccine. And that's our argument. There's no immunity because this wasn't emergency powers that they were using. This was the misuse and misappropriation of those powers. And we're saying we do have standing to sue because they caused. What did the Children's Health Defense have to do in response to this? They had to re-educate the public, to educate them on the facts that the FDA was lying to them about. So it caused a massive expense on the behalf of the Children's Health Defense, made more complicated by the FDA during the same time period, telling Facebook to suspend and get rid of Children's Health Defense, to demonetize them, to take off their ads, to take off their posts, to take down Robert Kennedy Jr. from Instagram when he had almost 1 million followers. So that made it even more difficult and more expensive for Children's Health Defense to go out there and defend itself, and more importantly, defend the health of young children in America from this massive deception campaign by the Food and Deception Agency. And so that's known as injury. They also have injury under the APA within legally protected interest and within the ultra-virus standard for challenging under pre-APA law. Also, the individual parents face risk because at any given point, some of them are one of them is a Navy chaplain that moves around. They may end up in a location where they force his kid to get a vaccine. And that's only possible because the FDA is lying about this drug. And the same thing, and any Texas parent is at risk because some random person may, in the best interest of the kid, do it. And then we represent all the foster children in Texas who don't have any representation, who don't know they're at risk, who are maybe the most vulnerable and the most at risk, because all of them can be injured because of what the FDA is doing. So this is a case that will be critical to protecting children now and going forward, and limiting the abusive power of the FDA, or the courts will continue to allow, in the name of emergencies, a massive exception to constitutional protection and public health in America. And we'll find out which way the courts are going to go.
Well, so if I'm understanding it correctly or assessing it correctly, your biggest issue is going to be standing. You're going to say your standing is not lost revenues, but expenses.
Organizational resources, yeah.
Okay.
Well, for the organization, and then imminent risk of injury to these whole group of unprotected children.
Okay. The imminent risk, I think, is at least that seems to be more direct. The expenses are one thing, but Robert, I'm just going to bring this up. This is Albert Bourla. It'll tie us into the next subject. Real nice. Emergency uses of the vaccine have not been approved or licensed by U.S. FDA, but have been authorized to prevent COVID-19 in ages 6 months and up. See fact sheet. Robert, let me see. I just want to go back so that I have the full context. In June, we shared that we are developing a bivalent Omicron, yada, 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 adapted vaccine. It's not in quotes, but it should be. I'm excited to update that we completed our EUA submission to US FDA today and plan to complete our EMA submission in the coming days. Robert,
this is the problem with emergency statutes. Because all of this is being, I mean, they admit they cannot meet the biologic licensing standard or don't want a biologic license because of the liability that might trigger. And so they're all just constant. I mean, here we are, what, 2.5 years later, and we're still in an emergency. I mean, there's a part of the statute says that Congress is supposed to reaffirm every 6 months. They haven't. I mean, there's just no grounds for this. And it's what some of us said from the very beginning is in the name of emergency powers, they will strip us of all our rights and remedies. And they're still doing it 2.5 years later. Here, they're doing it for 6-month-olds who face no real risk at all from COVID-19. I mean, the risk is literally statistically zero from COVID-19, particularly in the Omicron variant currently faces. Whereas they definitely face real risk from the so-called vaccine. And yet it's still being issued in the name of an emergency. I mean, it's ludicrous, and it's where that keeps going.